The corridors of Altair's Block B were dead. Not silent nothing on Nereth 9 was ever truly silent, but dead in the way rust could be. Slow, flaking, quietly final. Nigel Voss moved through the derelict sector with the precision of someone who had learned never to rush. His boots scraped across cracked plating. His coat brushed soot from the hanging wires that swayed like kelp in a forgotten tide. The air reeked of cold metal and old insulation, laced with the stale breath of a colony long abandoned by anything living. A faint red glow spilled from the scanner slate in his hand, pulsing with structural data no one would ever read. Pipe integrity 78%. Ceiling load 37%. Occupancy -null. Just numbers, feeding a report that would sink into some bureaucratic subfolder and never rise again. He didn't care. He wasn't here to save the colony. He was here to map what was left of it. Quiet work. Solitary. The only kind that didn't require pretending he still believed in people. That's when he heard it. Please, human? Nigel froze. The word didn't echo. It wasn't system noise. Not a ghost ping. The scanner gave no indication of life. No elevation in thermal or motion. Signatures. He stood very still, breath shallow. Help us. The voice came again, soft and dry. He turned slowly. Ahead, past a jagged breach in the wall, where a pedestrian skybridge had once met the block. A tunnel slumped under the weight of its own collapse. Dust shimmered in drifting shafts of artificial light. The structure sagged, exposed piping hanging like fractured ribs. Water dripped somewhere unseen, slow, steady, like a breath holding itself too long. Help us. They locked my mother in a cage, real, not echo. Not hallucination. Nigel lowered the scanner. His hand hovered near the shock baton clipped to his belt. Not drawn, not yet. He wasn't afraid. Not really. He was trained to expect ferals, unstable rigs, rot. But this voice? This was different. Then, out of the shadowed breach, she stepped. Into view. She was a child. Thin to the point of translucence, legs scratched, knees scabbed. Her skin was a pale violet, dulled by grime. Her tunic was stitched from scraps, cinched at the waist with copper wire. She had no shoes, no glow tags. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, held none of the frantic motion he expected. You're not supposed to be here, he said before he could stop. Himself. She didn't answer that. Just repeated, quieter now. They locked my mother in a cage. Protocol whispered in his head. Flagged the location. Contact dispatch. Wait. Let them clean it up. But she didn't plead. She didn't even blink. She just stood there, a living thing where nothing living should be. What's your name? Nigel asked. Isa? He nodded once. Show me. She turned without hesitation and led him into the dark. The tunnel narrowed, descending toward sublevel storage. Mold clung to the walls. The floor was slick with stagnant water. Isa walked barefoot, unflinching, her feet sure. Nigel followed, flashlight low, shadows sliding across the ruin like memories trying to hide. They stopped before a steel door bent inward at the frame. A crude weld of scrap metal reinforced the hinges. No markings, no serials, no lights. Nigel stepped forward, peering into the gap. The stench hit him first sweat, blood, something chemical. A single fixture flickered above, casting strobe-like. Pulses into the dark interior. Inside, behind a mesh barrier crudely welded into place, was a woman. She sat curled into the corner, legs drawn to her chest. Her skin was glacial violet, crisscrossed with bruises and faint bioluminescent tattoos. Her clothing was torn, more suggestion than coverage. Her hair fell in tangled waves of white and blue. She didn't move when she saw him. She just stared. Eyes narrowed, tired, calculating. Nigel dropped to a knee and inspected the lock. Handmade, ugly, effective. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered again. But this time it wasn't to her. Isa crouched beside him, watching, waiting. He pulled a fastener rod from his bag, slid the flat edge into the gap, and began to work. It took 40 seconds. The lock clicked. The door groaned open. The woman inside didn't stand. She watched him, studied. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. Nigel didn't answer. Instead, he shrugged off his coat and held it out. She took it. Not quickly, not gratefully, just deliberately, as if weighing what it meant. "I live nearby," he said. "There's food, heat." She said nothing. But Isa reached up and took Nigel's hand. He looked down at her. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. He looked back at the cage, at the bruises, at the welded seams. He didn't know who built it. He didn't know what came next. But he knew one thing. He wasn't reporting this. He was bringing them home. Asterisk, the walk back felt longer than it should have, as if the corridors had shifted while they were gone, stretching out between broken conduits and fractured walls. Nigel moved with measured pace, each step deliberate, boots echoing against rust-streaked floors, slick with condensation. Isa kept hold of his hand, small fingers cold but steady. She didn't speak, neither did he. Behind them, Arenia followed, silent and barefoot, Nigel's coat wrapped tightly around her bruised frame, like a shield she wasn't sure she had permission to carry. They passed the old lift shaft, its cables snapped and hanging like vines, and through a maintenance tunnel, half collapsed with debris. Twice Nigel stopped to clear their way, pushing aside broken panels and shattered conduits with the flat of his shock tool. Arenia didn't help. She didn't need to. He could see how she moved slow, careful, always watching. Not from fear. From memory. When they reached his block, the motion lights didn't flicker. They hadn't worked in weeks. His door was manual, reinforced, patched together with salvage bolts and a spare oxygen latch. Not fancy, not welcoming. But it locked, and no one else came. He pushed it open and stepped aside, letting them enter first. Arenia paused at the threshold. Her eyes scanned the room with surgical focus. No flicker of surprise or curiosity, just assessment. Her grip on the coat remained tight as she stepped inside. Isa released Nigel's hand, only to cross directly to the crate beside the heater, where she crouched and placed her fingers against the warm metal surface, like it was a hearth. Nigel shut the door behind them and turned the latch with a soft click. The room was small. A cot in one corner, a fold-out crate for a table, a solar kettle beside a stack of sealed ration packs. The heater unit buzzed weakly on the far wall, exhaling warmth in irregular pulses. A threadbare towel hung near a shallow metal basin. One crate served as a chair, another as storage. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and no one bled here. "You can sit," Nigel said. His voice cracked slightly from disuse. Arenia didn't sit. Instead, she stood near the cot, posture still rigid, legs trembling just faintly beneath the coat. Isa leaned against her mother's side and looked up at her without a word. Nigel moved toward the kettle, filled the reservoir from the filter tank, and set it to heat. The faint smell of warm plastic filled the air. He pulled 2 ration packs flatbread and starch mash and knelt beside the table to prepare them. "I don't have much," he said, keeping his tone low, "but it's yours while you're here." No answer. He set the first plate near Isa. The girl sniffed the mash, then looked up. Arenia nodded once. Only then did she eat. Fingers small, movements cautious, but controlled. Not desperate. Practiced. Nigel offered the second portion to Arenia. She didn't take it. He didn't press. Instead, he opened the storage crate, pulled out a folded blanket, and laid it carefully on the floor beside the cot. "You take the bed," he said. "It's warmer." Still nothing. But after a long moment, she moved, sat down slowly. Her knees bent with a stiffness that spoke of days cramped in a cage. Isa climbed up beside her, curling close. Arenia didn't shift. She just sat there, arms still around the child, eyes fixed on the door. Nigel dimmed the lights and adjusted the heater. The room settled into silence. He sat cross-legged on the floor near the crate, his back against the metal frame, his head tilted slightly to the side, not watching them, not ignoring them. Just present. Time passed. The child slept first. Her breathing softened, her hand curled beneath her chin, her legs tucked into her mother's side. But Arenia stayed upright. Even in the low amber glow of the backup light, he could see the way. Her fingers twitched, reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. Maybe a collar. Maybe a memory. Maybe both. She didn't speak, but she didn't leave the bed either. And when her head finally tipped sideways, eyes drifting closed against her will, Nigel didn't move, didn't make a sound. Just let her have the silence. The first silence. That didn't come with chains. He didn't sleep much that night. Every time his eyes closed, he saw the cage again. The bruises, the cold eyes, the steel welded by hands that thought ownership was a right. But what he remembered most was the way she looked at the room before entering, like she didn't believe it wasn't a trap, like she was waiting for the price. Morning came without sun, just a flicker from the light strip above the heater, a pale blue glow that washed over the floor, like the start of something they hadn't named yet. Nigel stood first. He boiled water. Quietly. Set out 3 cups. The child stirred, sat up, blinked. Ia hadn't moved, not much, but her hand now rested flat against the cot, fingers stretched just enough to suggest she'd stayed there on purpose. Not because she had to, because she chose to. Nigel poured a cup and stepped close. She looked at him, didn't flinch. He offered it. She took it, sipped. Once. Still no thanks. She didn't need to say it. The cup in her hands, warm now, said enough. The heater clicked softly as it cycled, a low mechanical hum filling the quiet. Steam drifted from the cracked ceramic cups on the crate. Isa had settled cross-legged beside it, carefully breaking her ration biscuit into quarters before eating each piece like it was a ceremony. Arenia sat on the cot, blanket drawn around her shoulders, hair tangled and half covering her face. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She drank in slow, deliberate sips, her fingers never leaving the rim of the cup. Nigel watched from the floor, not intruding. He had learned early in his registry training that trauma didn't fade in straight lines. It coiled and twisted and repeated. So he didn't ask questions. He didn't press. He offered only what could be refused. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was the kind that hung gently between people, trying not to disturb something fragile. That morning, Nigel stepped outside. For the first time since bringing them in, he checked the corridor clear. No sounds, no recent tracks. The security sweepers hadn't passed in days. His block remained a blind spot, the kind forgotten by both authority and threat. When he returned, the air inside the unit had shifted. The floor was swept. The basin had been rinsed, his laundry, mostly old long-sleeve shirts and compression gear, had been folded and restacked with careful symmetry. Arenia hadn't moved far. She still sat on the cot, but now her posture was more upright. More. Hers, one leg folded beneath the other, not defensive, not tense, just balanced. Nigel said nothing. Set down the tools he'd carried and adjusted the vent above the heater to let more warmth circulate. Isa looked up from where she was doodling with her fingertip on a scuffed metal panel, dragging invisible lines through the dust. "I'm drawing." "A plant," she said without prompting. Nigel glanced over. "Oh? It's small now," she murmured, "but it'll grow." He didn't correct her. He didn't tell her the colony hadn't supported live flora in years, or that the water grid wouldn't allow for anything more than recycled steam. He just nodded. "Double quotes, good soil here," he said quietly. "Good place to start." Arenia's lips twitched, not a smile, but close. That afternoon, she took one of his shirts, the gray one with worn seams, and slipped it on over the coat, then cinched it at her waist with a loop of thermal cable. It hung loosely over her frame, brushing. Mid-thigh, sleeves rolled to the elbow. The coat was folded neatly and placed on the crate. The gesture was quiet but clear. She was making the space hers, later. While Issa napped with her head nestled between a pillow and the blanket she'd claimed, Arenia approached the heater. She stood there a long time, arms folded, watching the orange. Coil pulse like a steady heart. Nigel was seated across the room, sorting through old registry slates. He looked up only when she spoke. "She's sleeping better." He nodded. "I noticed. She doesn't kick in her sleep anymore. That only happens when she thinks she's still in danger." "She's not." Arenia turned to him, the light warming the hollow of her collarbone, where the shirt had slipped slightly askew. "I know. That's why I haven't left yet." Nigel didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, the heater glowed longer than usual. The vent didn't shut off mid-cycle. Issa climbed onto the cot without a word, blanket tucked beneath her chin. Arenia moved more slowly, not from pain but from intention. She lay beside her daughter, arm draped over the child's side, one knee curled beneath her. Nigel pulled out the spare blanket and prepared his usual spot on the floor. As he folded the edge beneath his back, he felt it the shift, not in the air. In the space between them, Renia turned to look at him. "I know what you think," she said softly, "and I'm waiting to break, to fall apart." He held her gaze. "I don't think that. You do. But I won't. I already did. That part's done." Nigel didn't argue. Instead, he unrolled the last strip of ration foil and set it aside. "There's food for tomorrow. I'll run another scan loop while you rest." She looked down at Issa. Then back at him. "Do you always sleep alone?" she asked. His voice was quiet, honest. "Until now." She didn't reply. But when the lights dimmed fully and the heater clicked into night mode, casting a warm pulse through the dark, Arenia shifted. She moved the spare blanket to the space between them, didn't lie beside him, but didn't leave the gap untouched either. She folded the blanket in half and left it there, not a wall, not a bridge, just a line she now trusted herself to cross. When she was ready, the night didn't end. It simply softened. The hum of the heater unit deepened to a near whisper, blending with the distant trickle of condensation in the pipes. Beyond the sealed hatch, Nerith 9 slumbered in fractured silence. No patrols, no machinery, no screams. Just the echo of a colony, too forgotten to be dangerous anymore. And inside the small room carved out of ruin, 3 people slept in the same space without fear. Nigel lay on the floor, not quite asleep, one arm folded beneath his head, the other resting across his chest. He listened to Issa's slow breathing, the small size of a child in real rest. That sound had changed. The first night, it had been shallow, twitchy, alert. Now it came in full, rounded waves. Not because the room was safe. Because the people in it were above him. Arenia hadn't moved. She lay on the cot with Issa curled beside her. The spare blanket remained folded between them, untouched, but not forgotten. It sat as a quiet promise of something neither of them had asked for, but had begun to consider. Sometime past the third heater cycle, Arinia shifted, gently, slowly, not to leave, but to see. She looked down at her daughter, then over the side of the cot at Nigel. Her breath caught just slightly when she realized he was awake. "I used to hate silence," she said, voice nearly inaudible. Nigel turned his head. "You don't now?" "No. Now I hate what breaks it." She sat up, brushing her fingers lightly through Isa's sleep-matted hair. On the transit ship, before everything, they made us sleep in communal bunks. 40 people in the same deck pod. The noise never stopped. Even in sleep, people were whispering, sobbing, breathing. I got used to drowning in it. Nigel watched. Her. He didn't speak. Arinia leaned her back against the wall. After the cage, the silence was worse. It wasn't quiet. It was hollow, like it was waiting to echo something. Nigel sat up slowly. His shoulder ached. His lower back was stiff from the metal floor. He didn't complain. "You're not in the cage anymore." "I know," she said. "But sometimes my body doesn't." She turned her face toward him. Then, the room's dim amber light cast soft lines down her cheekbones. Her hair loose, silver white with faint blue threads, fell over one eye. She didn't move closer, but she didn't retreat either. "I've been trying to figure out if you want something from me," she said. Nigel kept his voice even. "I don't. That's the part I don't understand." "You don't have to," he said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Arinia looked down at her hands. Thin fingers clean now, but still marked faintly with old bruises and calluses from restrained clasps. She flexed them, curling the blanket edge tighter around her legs. Then, very quietly, she said, "I want to ask you for something." Nigel nodded. "Ask." She looked at him, eyes steady now. "I want you to hold me tonight." He didn't move. Not closer, not away. "I don't want it to mean anything it doesn't," she continued. "It's not a promise. Not a trade. I want to feel a human body near mine that doesn't expect to take something." Nigel inhaled slowly. "You can have that." "I want it for me," she said again. "Not for survival. Not for safety. Just for warmth. For proof I still get to choose. Then it's yours." She exhaled like she had been holding that breath since the first time she'd seen him at the cage door. Nigel stood slowly, picked up the spare blanket, and crossed to the cot. He didn't climb in. Not right away. He dimmed the light one notch, lower enough to leave only the heater's soft glow, then looked at her. She shifted, pulling the blanket aside. Isa had turned toward the wall in her sleep, small fists tucked under her chin, breathing soft and even. She hadn't stirred. Nigel lay down on top of the covers, not touching Arinia, just near. She adjusted herself next to him, thigh to thigh, shoulder to chest. Her hand rested lightly on his ribs. She didn't flinch when he gently rested his hand on her waist. No pressure, just presence. Their faces were close, breath mingling in the space between them. Her voice came low, shaped from somewhere deep and real. "Is this what it feels like when no one owns your body?" Nigel answered without hesitation. "Yes." She nodded, just once. Her eyes drifted closed. She didn't speak again. They didn't kiss. They didn't promise. They just stayed. Held together, not for warmth, not for rescue, just because she chose to be held, and he chose to hold her. When sleep came, it did so gently, without fear. For the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. And for the first time in years, so did he. Morning arrived in the same quiet way night had left, without ceremony, without alarms, without anything more than the heater's faint hum warming the metal bones of the room. Nigel woke slowly. His arm had gone numb beneath Arinia's head, but he didn't move. Her breath was warm against his chest. Her fingers had curled into the fabric of his shirt sometime in the night and stayed there, not clinging, just resting, like she'd finally allowed herself to forget where she was. Issa still slept, cocooned in the blanket with one foot poking out at the edge of the cot, her lips slightly parted, dreaming softly. Asterisk. Nigel kept his eyes closed a little longer than usual. Not out of fatigue, out of choice, out of stillness. Because nothing was chasing them right now. Because nothing needed to be said. Because this moment was a fragile thing, and he didn't want to be the one to wake it too soon. Eventually, Arenia stirred. Not sharply, not startled, just slowly rising back into herself. She didn't flinch when she realized where she was. Her eyes opened, calm and steady, and she looked up at him. "You're still here," she said quietly. Nigel opened his eyes. "I told you I wouldn't go." She studied him for a long moment, then slid out from beneath his arm with a grace that didn't hide her soreness. Her movements were stronger now, but not whole. Healing took time, and she moved like someone who knew exactly how much time it might still take. Nigel sat up and swung his legs over the edge of the cot. Arini crossed the room barefoot, the long shirt belted at her waist shifting gently as she moved. She took the basin's cloth in one hand and rinsed her face with slow, practiced motion. A ritual, not for cleanliness, but for control. For reality. "I'll start tea," Nigel said, voice still husky from sleep. She nodded. As the water boiled and steam rose from the kettle's spout. Issa woke. She sat up gradually, rubbing at one eye with a small fist, then blinked at both adults with the slow, dazed clarity of a child who knew this wasn't a dream anymore. "Morning," she mumbled. "Morning," Nigel answered, handing her a warmed ration biscuit wrapped in cloth. She took it, leaned her head against the wall, and began to nibble. Her hair was still tangled, her fingers dusty. But she smiled, just barely, and that was more than yesterday. As they ate, Nigel watched Arenia glance at the door, not in fear this time, but in thought. Her eyes tracked the locking mechanism, the reinforced frame, the place where dust had collected in the corner like a marker of abandonment. Then she spoke. "Someone built that cage," she said. "Not just to hold me, to hide me. They didn't want anyone to know I was there." Nigel set his cup down. "You don't have to talk about it," he said. Double quotes. "No, but you should know." She sat across from him now, cross-legged on the floor, her posture upright, not defensive, not small. Her hair fell loosely over one shoulder, still damp from her morning wash. "I wasn't brought here by smugglers," she said. "I came on a legitimate transit vessel. I had documents. Temporary. Labor clearance. It wasn't permanent, but it was legal." She paused, took a slow breath. "I was assigned to dock work, manual labor. Nothing dangerous. Issa was supposed to be in the children's quarter until my shift ended, but one day she followed me. Just wandered in. A registry officer saw her and flagged our profile, claimed my permits were fake. Said Issa wasn't registered, called her contraband. Within 6 hours, my access was revoked. My papers were gone. I couldn't find my supervisor. No one would speak to me." Nigel clenched his jaw, but said nothing. "They took Issa. Said she would be processed. I found her 2 days later, hiding in the waste corridor near subdeck storage. That's when he found me. The man who claimed to work for security. Said I could stay off the record if I cooperated." Her eyes didn't blink. He didn't want labor. He wanted obedience, display, a trophy he could keep where no one would check. That cage wasn't protocol. It was personal. Nigel's voice was low, rough. "Is he still alive?" Arenia's gaze didn't waver. "I think he left the colony. Or he died. Doesn't matter. He got bored first." Issa was watching now, quietly, from her corner. I used to think if I stayed quiet long enough, I'd stop being seen. That eventually I'd be let go. But I was wrong. The only reason I'm out is because Issa found you. Nigel reached for the registry slate near the heater, powered it on. What are you doing? Arenia asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he connected the slate to the mainline data port through a bypass wire he'd hidden months ago, something not standard issue. A trick he'd used when mapping abandoned sectors. He opened her profile. There wasn't one. No identity. No record. No evidence she'd ever been on Nerith 9. But there was an access code, buried under old supervisor logs, attached to a suspended badge ID from nearly 2 years ago. It was still active. Nigel wiped it, deleted the logs, scrubbed the reference. Trail. Then he locked the slate and set it aside. No one will find you, he said. Not through me. Not through anything tied to this block. Arenia didn't thank him. She just sat there, still and silent, as if something heavy inside her had just lifted. Later, when Issa was asleep and the heater cycled back on, Arenia stood from the cot and crossed to Nigel. She held his old coat in her hands. When the shirt dries, she said, I'll wash yours. He looked at her. You don't have to. I know. She sat beside him. They didn't touch, but they didn't leave space either. She looked toward the cot. She asked if this place is ours now. Nigel's voice was quiet. Is it? She meant the room, not the colony. Still, he said, it can be. If you want it to be. She nodded, slowly. I think I do. Asterisk. The rain started sometime after third cyclesoft at first, then rhythmic, strumming in long, uneven taps against the fractured piping overhead. It didn't fall directly into their section of the colony dome. Nerith 9's weather grid hadn't functioned in years, but condensation gathered in the upper struts, dripped through broken vents, and echoed down the corridors like distant footsteps no one was making. Inside the room, the air was warm, still close. Nigel sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through a cache of decommissioned power cells, salvaged weeks ago from the collapsed mezzanine. Each one flickered dimly as he tested the charge, marking the viable ones with a piece of salvaged cloth. Issa was nearby, quietly drawing circles and spirals into the dust with her fingertip on a stripped metal plate, humming to herself under her breath. Arenia stood by the viewport, what little remained of it. A narrow strip of thickened glass patched into the hall, long ago fogged from time and neglect. She watched the rain fall through it, arms folded, her body silhouetted by the faint orange light of the heater. She wore his long gray shirt again, now clean and shortened slightly by a knotted cord at the hip, the tribal sash she used to keep. Draped across her like armor, now hung folded on the cot, no longer worn, not discarded. Just not needed to define her anymore. She hadn't spoken in nearly 15 minutes. Nigel could feel the silence was different this time. Not restful, not peaceful. There was tension in it, not between them, but within her. A pacing that had no steps. He didn't look up until she exhaled and finally spoke. You're pacing without moving, he said softly, setting the cell down. Arenia didn't turn around. Her voice was low. I'm thinking. Anything I should worry about? Yes, that made him stop. He stood, slowly, careful not to close the space too quickly. She turned toward him. Her face was still, unreadable, not afraid, not angry. Just quiet. But her eyes held something brittle beneath them. When I look like this, she said, clean, upright, not limping, not bruised. Do I still belong here? Nigel blinked once. What? She stepped closer, arms still crossed. When I was bleeding and half naked, when I was a mess, you took me in. Now I'm standing. Here, not asking for anything, not offering anything. So if I stop needing you, will you still want me here? He didn't answer immediately. She wasn't attacking. But he heard it, the fear wrapped in sharpness, veiled behind observation. The fear that she was only worth shelter when broken. The fear that kindness had an expiration date. Nigel took a breath. I didn't take you in because you were broken, Irenia. Didn't you? Her voice cracked slightly, then steadied. He shook his head. I took you in because no one else did. Because someone had to open the door. She looked away then, jaw tight. Her shoulders rose slightly, like she was bracing. He stepped forward not to touch her, but close enough she could feel him there, if she wanted to. I don't want you here because you're weak, he said. I want you here because when you stand like this, proud, clean, angry, I still see you. And I still want you here. She didn't speak. Not at first dot. Then she sat down slowly on the edge of the cot. Her fingers pressed against the blanket's seam, smoothing the edge. I don't know what I'm supposed to be anymore, she said. Nigel sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. You don't have to be anything. That's worse. Why? Because if I choose, and it's the wrong thing, I lose everything. He didn't look away. Then take your time. And when you're ready, choose something small. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, voice even softer, I already have. What? She looked up. Her eyes glistened. Not with tears, just the strain of not letting them fall. I moved the blanket last night, she said. Closer to where you sleep. Nigel felt his breath pause. I noticed, he said. It wasn't a promise, she whispered. Just trust, a little of it. That's enough. From the floor, Issa stirred. Are you going to be her partner? Now? She mumbled sleepily, still tracing patterns in the dust without lifting her head. Both adults froze. Nigel looked at her. Issa hadn't moved, just kept her cheek to the floor, her eyes half-lidded. We're talking, Nigel said, careful. Do people have to talk to be partners? Issa asked. In a good world, yes, Issa shrugged. I don't mind. You don't yell. You make soup. You didn't throw her away. Irenia let out something between a breath and a laugh. The kind you don't expect until it's already escaped. Relief in a cracked shell. Go to sleep, she said gently. I'm drawing a plant. We'll water it tomorrow. Okay. Issa's eyes closed again. Her fingers stilled. Asterisk. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't tension anymore. It wasn't the guarded hush of two strangers sharing space. It was the soft quiet of a room where no one needed to explain why they hadn't left. Irenia turned to Nigel. I don't want to feel owned. You never will. That night, she didn't return to the cot alone. She brought the second blanket with her and laid it beside him, not to use, but to mark the line she now trusted herself to cross. And she did. Not out of fear, not because she had to, but because she chose to. The end.